Welcome to the Menopause and Cancer podcast, where we speak with cancer patients, survivors, and incredible experts in their fields to help us find solutions to our symptoms and ideas to improve our health. Now, are you part of the 4% of cancer survivors who follow cancer lifestyle recommendations? Or are you part of the 96% who doesn't? Do you even know what these cancer lifestyle recommendations are? I'm here joined by the fantastic oncology nutrition specialist, Krystle Zuniga, who is going to discuss the governing bodies who create these lifestyle recommendations, what the guidance says, and also what are the hurdles of accessing this and why do so few cancer survivors adhere to those recommendations. And I also want to talk to you a little bit about our risks and our benefits of anything, because many of you are navigating a secondary cancer diagnosis. Many of you had really, really healthy lifestyles pre-cancer, and yet you've had a cancer diagnosis. And so it's really, really important for me to also communicate that these recommendations are out there. And yes, maybe they can help us reduce our risks of a recurrence or reduce the risk of cancer in the first place. And Krystle will talk to us a little bit about exactly what the data says. But it's really important to also think there is only so much we can do. You might have tried everything and yet still had the cancer diagnosis. And we sit with that uncertainty, don't we? So today I want to ensure that we all know what these recommendations are so that we are at least the 100% of cancer survivors out there, because you're listening to the podcast, who at least know what they are. And that to me is most important. With that, let's welcome the fabulous and knowledgeable Krystle into this conversation. Welcome back to the podcast. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm so excited to speak with you again.
Thank you. Our episode that we recorded quite a few months back on busting diet cancer myths was a really hugely popular episode. And so I'm very excited that you're back on the podcast. We have a less comfortable topic to discuss, but it's really important. If our podcast audience is a little bit like the whole of the cancer audience out there, then only 4% of all of our podcast listeners and cancer survivors in general meet lifestyle recommendations. And that is shocking. I want to know what these lifestyle recommendations are, and for you to tell us as a healthcare professional how we can adhere to them, please.
Yeah, great. So that number that you're referencing came from a recent study. It was published in April of 24, and it was survey data. And really, they're only asking about 4 of the lifestyle recommendations. One of them was about alcohol. One was about physical activity. The other was BMI, so obesity, and fruits and vegetables. Can't forget about that one. So to understand too, like there was limitations, like adherence to alcohol recommendations said who was not drinking any alcohol. For physical activity, it was how many are reporting that they're physically active at all. It wasn't really about hitting those 150 minutes plus 2 days of resistance training. And then, of course, eating 2.5 vegetables, 1.5 servings of fruit was what they're asking about. So unfortunately, it did not actually capture all of the recommendations as well. And it didn't really capture some of the details we have about those recommendations. But even with those limitations aside, I think we can still gain some valuable data from this, showing that, yes, it is challenging for cancer survivors to adhere to our recommendations to help reduce the risk of recurrence. Right. And so,
Okay, so I want to know, I would love, we have thousands of people listening to our conversation now, and I would love to hear what all of these people would say to me. I wonder if there are people at home thinking, I never knew there are any lifestyle recommendations. My oncologist didn't say, my surgeon didn't say. And I wonder how many people are thinking, what are they talking about? So before we talk about a bit more in detail what we can do to improve, what do we do about the 96% of people that don't adhere? What are these lifestyle recommendations? Who created them? What are the governing bodies that tell us how do we live? So these are like your 10 commandments almost of how to live, how to live cancer survivorship, how to be a cancer survivor, how to move, eat, and what to do once you've had a cancer diagnosis. So what are these things?
Sure. So this study was looking specifically at the American Cancer Society recommendations, which fall very much in line with the American Institute for Cancer Research / World Cancer Research Fund recommendations. So they are, I'm going to speak a little bit more to the AICR WCRF recommendations, because those have actually been out for quite a while, have a lot of evidence behind them. And American Cancer Societies does too, but they're kind of piggyback off of this expert report that gets a little more updated. So what are the recommendations? One of them is called about physical activity. So 150 minutes of moderate physical activity plus some resistance training. That's part of that recommendation. Maintain a healthy body weight. I really hate that terminology, but that is part of the recommendations, and that's related to obesity being associated with an increased risk of cancer and potentially increased risk of recurrence. Eating a diet that is limited in processed foods and sugar-sweetened beverages. Old recommendations said to limit alcohol. There's been a little bit more guidance around that. I know we can talk about that later. To really, there's no safe amount and that we should avoid alcohol. Limiting red meat, avoiding processed meats. Eating high fiber foods, so your whole grains, fruits, and vegetables as part of that. So when you kind of look at these recommendations, that doesn't sound that exciting, right? It's not really that like mind blowing. It's really in line with what we recommend for reducing the risk of many chronic diseases. So American Cancer Society's recommendations, again, very much in line with the AICR, WCRF recommendations there. But why I reference AICR is because that's like really, I have those like memorized, what those recommendations are.
Okay, so this is really a way of living. This is saying you have been diagnosed with cancer. Here are some ways of living, eating, moving, consuming certain foods or beverages or not. So we can help you feel better, but also reduce your risks of a cancer recurrence. So it's really important we're clear about what the guidance is telling us. I was never told any of this. I was actually saying to my doctors, is there anything I should eat or not eat? And I was told, no, you carry on. And I was served all the big cookies and the pieces of cake on the chemo ward. And so there was none of that. I was proud. I was training for a half marathon after my active treatment finished. And I was so eager to say, and I was kind of met a little bit with, do also look after yourself. You've been through a lot, I'm talking 10 years ago, and maybe the whole idea of rest is a good thing, which it is, but we know more about the benefits of exercise now. And so I wonder how many people out there are thinking, I was never told. Like, there is clear guidance and I was never told. And if you have this guidance in America, I'm suggesting or assuming there are similar guidances around the world, in the UK and other countries.
Yes, so that American Institute for Cancer Research is part of the World Cancer Research Fund. So these are,
Right.
yes, international recommendations. And you're right that many have the experience of this never being mentioned to them. There has actually been some survey information about oncologists not being aware of recommendations for exercise, for example. And so if there's not awareness by the healthcare providers and they're not relaying that information to their patients, or they might feel like, well, I mentioned a few of these recommendations, and each of them you can go into a little bit more discussion, and they might feel like, well, if I mention this, and it's just going to open up a can of worms, and we're just going to end up with a long discussion that maybe they don't have time for. But I think at a minimum, there should be the handout or something displayed in the office of what these recommendations are, to know that this isn't just take care of yourself. These are evidence-based recommendations for reducing the risk of cancer. And in those guidelines, they say for cancer survivors to follow these recommendations as well.
And you're obviously a board certified specialist in oncology nutrition. So this is what you live and breathe, right? You're not a dietitian helping just healthy perimenopausal or menopausal women or cancer
Mhm.
survivors, you're really there with your oncology hat on. And so let's think a little bit, if there is less conversation between patient and doctor, some of that 96% that never knew these guidances existed are going to be falling into that void. They were never told, their doctor never told them. But there might also be other reasons. It might actually be really hard to follow these guidances and to change your diet and to start exercising. There might be other barriers, socioeconomic barriers. What do you see in practice? You have lots of students, you're a teacher as well. What do you see when you talk about that with other colleagues? Where are the barriers?
Yeah, so when I posted about this information on my Instagram, I said this was
Mm,
making the headlines about 4%. But there was little discussion when I was reading these articles about what are the barriers, right? We talked about one barrier is they might not ever receive this information about what are these recommendations. But then also we know that cancer and cancer treatment can have significant impacts on people's quality of life. And for example, one report came out recently too that 1 in 4 cancer survivors have mobility limitations, and that includes
mm,
challenges with maintaining activities of daily living,
mm.
right? So if it's
Yeah.
hard to even get your laundry, it's going to be really
Mm,
hard to go meet those 150 minutes of moderate activity. Or someone has a surgery, which now they have some physical limitations, never
mm,
had guidance on, well, then what can I do and how do I modify my
mm,
activities based on these
mm,
new limitations?
mm,
Some cancer therapies might make it more challenging to eat certain foods. We know a lot with these colorectal cancers, for example, if they had part of their bowel removed, that is going to be a challenge with being able to eat some fruits and vegetables and whole grains, but then they don't get that nutrition support. And then what can I eat? Or how do I modify these foods so that I can digest and absorb them better? So to understand that cancer and the effects of its treatment itself can make it more challenging to adhere to these guidelines in comparison to the general population.
yeah. And I'm just thinking about a lady I spoke to recently who's got really bad neuropathy in her fingers and her feet. And it actually makes basic walking a little bit, she's feeling a bit dizzy, almost doesn't feel like she's very secure on her steps. So she's not going to go to her next Zumba class, right? Even if that's what she's done all her life. So there are many things that change. And I always will say to people, we feel like we have to figure it all out ourselves, but it's almost unrealistic to think that we now have to come up with the best way to exercise or change our diet if you've eaten for decades in a certain and similar way. So it's also the
Mhm.
access to support, isn't it? Just basic support.
100%. It's about that support because, yes, people are trying to navigate their
Mm,
life post survivorship, might be trying to get back to work or might have challenges with work now and have financial issues. So it's really unfortunate that the standard of care is not automatic referrals to someone that can help support with nutrition or
yeah.
physical activity or mental health support services as well. But you're absolutely right that you shouldn't put that pressure on yourself to try to figure this all out yourself, that there are experts that could help you navigate this. And if your provider is not recommending these things, one, as we said, they might not even be aware of these guidelines, might not understand all of the limitations and challenges that you're facing, to advocate for yourself.
Mm. And I
Ask for the
wonder,
referrals.
for everyone listening to our conversation now, thinking, who has tried to maybe stick to some of these recommendations? Who has thought, I want to change my diet or I want to move or exercise to try and reach those goals? Have you had help? Have you tried to even reach out? Sometimes we think there's no one there who can help me. I should be doing this by myself. But maybe you haven't tried, and maybe there are people, maybe there are local charities, for example. So as an organization, we're working on a database for the UK at the moment where we're trying to pull together all local cancer charities in the whole of the country and put them all onto a database so that we can say, look, if you're over there, there is a great charity that can help you perhaps with financial support or emotional support. There are so many great local groups and no one really connects them. So I'm really passionate about people connecting to great and existing services. So maybe people need to put their thinking hat on as well and think, who's there locally who can support me with nutrition or diet or exercise or anything like that. Can we talk a bit more about the diet and nutrition aspect and what the recommendations really are, seeing, or, that I've got you here in front of me as this amazing oncology dietitian. Talk to me more about the food aspect.
Sure. So first, I want to say that is amazing about putting this resource together.
Yeah.
Really, that I know that's probably a lot of work to do, but going to be an invaluable source of information. So that's amazing.
I'll add something there for you, Krystle. There were almost 30 volunteers. These are all people that have listened to the Menopause and Cancer podcast, that have come to our workshops or webinars, that have said, I will help you. And so this was a real team effort. We have come up with a database. We've given people counties. We've done it by county. And we're really hoping this will be a valuable resource, because I know there is lots of help out there, but we don't always know where to look. Some people have great websites and other people have really bad websites, and you could never find them unless you walk down, the particular high street. So I'm really hoping, fingers crossed, it'll be a great resource. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, I love that. It just shows how people want to pay it forward or make it better for those they had the struggles and want to make it easier for other people. Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So sorry, I interrupted you. Let's go to
No,
diet.
no, that's great. I love to hear about that. That makes me so happy to hear about. So with the nutrition piece, yes, our recommendations, cancer prevention recommendations, which we recommend that cancer survivors adhere to as well. And now more research showing that, yeah, when people follow these recommendations, there's a better chance of good outcomes, like reducing the risk of mortality or reducing the risk of recurrence, for example. So the recommendation about eating more whole grains, fruits, vegetables, beans, legumes, and then limiting that red meat and processed meat. When you kind of put those two together and limiting processed foods, it's about having a more whole foods, plant-forward diet. I always like to emphasize this does not mean vegan or vegetarian, just that most of your plate being plant foods. And part of that, there's many ways that is going to be beneficial for health, but one of the mechanisms could be that this is a really good way to get a lot of fiber in your diet, help support a healthy microbiome, help with the elimination of toxins from our environment. Also, plant foods are going to be really good sources of called phytochemicals. So these are bioactive compounds that are found in plants that can have anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, anti-cancer activity. And so the more foods that you're consuming that have these compounds, again, you're helping support your body's defenses against cancer.
I think there'll be a lot of people thinking, Krystle said to reduce processed meat and red meat. What do you mean? How much is okay? Because we don't have to stay away from all meat or processed meat, do we? Or what's the guidance there?
Yeah, it's interesting. Anytime I talk about that, people get a little pushback about that. People like their red meat. And actually the recommendation is less than 18 ounces of red meat, 16 to 18 ounces of red meat. I was trying to say, like, what
Is
would
that
that
a week?
be? Per week. Yes. Yeah, per week.
And what does that look like? Is that a piece of steak or what's that?
Yeah, so about the size of the palm of your hand would be about 4 ounces of whether it's steak or pork. So what we say red meat would be classified would include like your lamb, pork, beef, classified as red meat. And so there's specific guidance about red meat to limit to 16 to 18 ounces per week.
So that's like 3 portions, right? I would say. So it's in the whole week. So if you think many people have meat, so if I think back of my Austrian diet, pre-cancer diet, ham, salami for breakfast is kind of like normal, in European sort of breakfast tables. There'll always be a bit of meat at lunch. Many people have, their meat and 2 veg for dinner. So the general diet is quadrupled, like way more than 3 pieces of red meat, isn't it? So it's also really good for you to be that clear, because I think a lot of people think, oh, that means I can't have any, but it doesn't mean you can't have any. It means the data is around the 16 to 18 ounces, so 3 portions about.
Yes, of the red meat. And you also mentioned things like ham and salami. That would classify, it depends on the ham, whether it's more like the deli ham,
Yeah.
but that would classify salami, for example, as processed meat. And the guidance around that is really to try to avoid that in the diet.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so that here in the US, very popular, like deli meats, like turkey, sliced ham, those types of things that we'll find in our refrigerated aisle, people put in their sandwiches. I know maybe more European countries, as you mentioned, more of those cured meats, like the salamis, the
Mm.
sausages. Those would be things, a bacon, to try
Yeah.
to
And
really
it's
limit.
And
Hmm.
it's so fascinating. So, a very good friend of mine, she's my age, she's in mid 40s. Her mum sadly got diagnosed with bowel cancer most recently. She's a patient in Austria. And so I talked to her about her mum, and, we had this really heart to heart conversations. Both of our mums had been diagnosed with cancer. So we had a real pouring our hearts out. And I said to her, so what did they tell your mum about how to eat after bowel cancer? If she's got surgery, there might be limitations or her bowel movements have changed. And they basically said to my friend's mum to just carry on eating everything, a little like everything. And in a meat heavy country, wow, I thought that's unusual. Like, I know she would be having at least 3 portions of meat and lots of processed foods as well. And for none of the doctors to talk about that, especially with bowel cancer, because we have a little bit more data
Yeah.
around bowel cancer and processed meat, don't we? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, exactly. Those recommendations about the red meat and processed meat are related to their association with bowel cancer and colorectal
Yeah,
cancer
yeah,
specifically. So, yes, that's where we have some of the strongest data for those
yeah.
particular foods and the risk
Mm,
of cancer. And so,
mm,
yes, the concern being with that they, in that curing process, nitrosamines can be formed, and those are things that can be carcinogenic to the bowel, right? The intestine is seeing everything that we eat. So, unfortunately, yes, that is something that can increase the risk of colorectal cancer. Processed meats were classified as a group 1 carcinogen by IARC, International Agency. It's a little early here. I'm trying to remember what the R stands for with cancer. But to understand too that it's not like, okay, you have a sandwich and now you're going to get bowel cancer. It's really about two, when we look at these foods, the concern is if you're eating more of a meat heavy diet, that is going to displace what you have room for in your diet for the beneficial plant compounds as well.
mm.
So yes, directly they have compounds that can be damaging to the intestinal cells, but then also when you're heavily relying on those, the dietary pattern is also going to be reflective of having less plants in the diet.
Mm. Yeah. And it is so easy. It needs to be a real project, doesn't it? Which is why it's so important to understand these guidances and recommendations so that we can make it into a project. Like today, I was very lazy, for example, and I'm sure lots of people resonate with that. The day just ran away with me. I didn't really have proper breakfast. Then I was really hungry. I had a cheese and sauerkraut toasty. I love a cheese and sauerkraut toasty. I had a good flatbread. But it is now, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, my time, and I haven't had a single piece of fruit or vegetable. So if I'm now going to have dinner later, I know that even if that is a really good quality meal, for example, and I'm going to add some vegetables to that, as a whole day, I'm going to lack some of that fiber as a normal person. And those days are so easily to be had unless you really think about it and plan it. It's quite hard. Would you agree to get it all done?
100% agree, because when you think about days where you're busy and rushing around, fruits and vegetables are requiring a little bit more prep or advanced thinking about this. Some are a little less portable than others. So when you're on the go, grabbing a more processed food, they're in those convenient packaging. They're easy to grab at stores and have it takeout. So yes, it does require a little bit more conscious efforts.
Yeah.
And that's just where it takes some advanced thinking of, if I want to eat more fruits and vegetables and whole grains in my diet, what can I do to have some things prepared, easy to make, as easy to grab as it is to grab a processed snack.
Yeah. Talk to processed food foods and ultra processed foods a little bit. We had a lot of conversation here in the UK on some quite, famous people's social media accounts, and it's all about different processed foods. But when I go into a normal supermarket, like apart from the fruit and veg aisle, it's a processed food place, right? Everything is, or a lot of things, like the majority of things are processed. So unless someone is going to cook everything from scratch, there will be an element of eating processed foods. What do we know about processed foods for cancer survivors?
Yes. So when we talk about processed foods too, it's important to understand where they lie on this spectrum of processing. So we're really much more concerned about these ultra processed foods that are looking a little less like a food, right? When you think about those fresh foods. And the concern with these ultra processed foods about what does make them more palatable to help you eat more, to help those stay on the shelf and have a better shelf life, is that they tend to be higher in fat, higher in sodium. They're going to be low fiber foods. So when you look at that nutritional profile, quite the opposite of what we're recommending for a dietary pattern. So it really is best to try to limit these ultra processed foods in the diet. And when I like to remind people about that the level of processing, like I have people that are concerned about tofu because that's processed. So that's very different than a bag of chips, for example, or buying beans
Okay.
that are canned. Like, yes, they are cooked in advance and there might be a little bit of sodium, but what's the trade-off there is that you're getting a lot of fiber and a plant-based protein, because the reality is that, yes, some people need some convenience items to make cooking faster. We have busy lives. But to find that spectrum of, okay, this is a little processing to help me include some more fruits and vegetables in my diet,
Yeah.
versus this is ultra processed and this is very high in sodium, fat, added sugar, the things that I should be trying to limit in my diet.
Yeah. And I love that. And often I think, what's the one step up I can do? What's the one improvement I can do? Like, it's not always buying organic, or for some people it might be. But it could be like choosing the tin of beans that has maybe less sugar, and I'm still going to eat the tin of beans or whatever it is. But I always think there is one way up of buying a healthier ingredient, or even in when you go out for dinner, you can you can have any food. I always think I can have any food. And if I make one little choice a little bit healthier, like over time, that really adds up. So I could, buy the spinach, like order the spinach alongside my fish and chips, for example, like add the little portion, always like a little upgrade. That's a
I
nice way
love
of cheating.
Absolutely. It's like that little upgrade instead of being overwhelmed with this overhaul of my dietary pattern, like I can never have chips again, right? Or I can never enjoy fish and chips, rather than thinking of what can I do to improve my meal right now, my snack right now, and thinking about those small changes over time can really add up. Like you said, adding a serving of spinach, there you got some more fiber in there. You got a serving of your green leafies, a serving of your veggies, all from making that one decision.
Yeah. And now we will talk about alcohol. I know it's one of those topics that people don't like talking about. It's very emotive, but we must talk about it. What does the guidance tell us about
Mhm.
alcohol?
Yeah, so back to those cancer prevention recommendations, they recommend limiting alcohol intake to two servings or less for men, one serving or less for women per day. With that said, some new guidance has come out because now we're showing that even at low intakes, that may increase risk, although not the same level as high intakes of alcohol. But that got to the discussion of saying, well, is it fair to say that there's any safe level of consumption? We know that even at low intakes, that could cause a small increase in risk. So the guidance around that has said, for cancer prevention purposes, it is best to avoid alcohol. Okay. So to understand that, yes, those original guidelines said one or less, two or less, but that's not to say, well, if you stay one or less or one per day, that there's no risk. It's just saying that one per day, for example, for women carries a very low risk, but not no risk, is where we really want
Yeah.
to be clear there.
Yeah. And it is one of those things, isn't it, that many people have so many mixed feelings around. Some people say I want to have a couple of glasses or however often, because it's really important for me. I want to carry on socializing and meeting my friends, and I want to have that lifestyle, and it makes me really actually feel good in the moment. And for
Mhm.
some people, they think I want to do everything and I'm going to cut it out. And I think it's so important to know, okay, what is the guidance, and then what do I do with that information? Because you've given us lots of recommendations. Yes,
Mhm.
only 4% stick to all of them, but could we argue to think that we can do if we do as much as we can, and that might not be perfect in everything, we're doing a pretty good job, or, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I've had some people that are asking for my permission of, I'm going to a wedding and I know they're going to have a glass of champagne for the toast. Can I have it? Yes, that's going to be a minimal consumption of alcohol, right? And so it is, I understand where the fear is coming from, but it's about finding that balance. What are you doing most of the time? Having an occasional cocktail at a nice dinner is not going to derail everything that you are doing for reducing the risk, like your exercise and your fruits and vegetables, all of that. So it's good to have some awareness, but it's important to not also swing on this other side of being so fearful that it is,
Yeah.
now something. I'm not saying like you need to drink alcohol. Absolutely not saying that, and being okay with it. If it feels better for you to not, because you don't want to have that additional risk at all, I totally understand that and definitely do support that.
Yeah. And all of these recommendations over time, they're just being backed up, aren't they? Because I saw a piece of communication from you recently that spoke about the benefits of exercise for those on immunotherapy. And so this
Mm-hmm.
is a fairly newer treatment. There wasn't any immunotherapy when I was going through my cancer diagnosis, for example. And so now there is evidence that exercise can help stay people on that treatment or do better. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Because I think it's great.
Oh, yeah, that was a really exciting study, right? As now immunotherapy is being used in more cancer types as well. Um, Although can carry less side effects than some chemotherapies, it definitely has still some adverse events, some more like autoimmune related. The immune system's just a little too stimulated. And yes, this study found that those that exercise had a lower risk of having an adverse event, because those adverse events are what lead to having to pause the therapy or dose reduce the therapy. So it's
Yeah.
showing that there is some better tolerance to immunotherapy, and get more and more research coming out about immunotherapy and how it's helping with
Mm,
diverse cancer
mm,
types. So I think there is going to be some more research, as you mentioned, some newer therapy being used in more cancer types, that we're going to start to see some of these benefits from our lifestyle therapies, because there's a strong body of evidence on the benefits of exercise during chemotherapy. Like there's no doubt, and it should be
yeah.
recommended to exercise like automatically, because we
Yeah.
see those benefits. But now seeing it with other treatment types is fantastic.
Mm. There is, I mean, I have spoken to you before, and I've heard everything you say. There is a little bit of a hype sometimes about the carnivore diet or some very strict eating patterns, and people saying they feel so much better and their menopausal symptoms are all gone and they have no more brain fog, and they lose weight and all of that. What does the expert tell me towards all of those sort of more drastic dietaries?
So there's been many fad diets that have come and gone. I feel like the carnivore diet one is the one that concerns me potentially the most,
Mm,
because of the high amount of animal protein in these diets, the high amount of saturated fat, which can increase the risk of cardiovascular disease. It's going to be very low fiber, sometimes no fibers. I know there's some variety of ways that people adhere to this diet, but generally there's no grains, no beans, legumes, veggies. Some people do include some amounts of fruit, but it is really limiting the foods that we know have been associated with reducing the risk of cancer, as well as the dietary patterns
mm,
associated with better clinical outcomes. So it is
mm,
very concerning. And yes, maybe you have some immediate effects, that weight loss, or some people are like, oh, my skin's cleared up. You cannot tell what your arteries look like based on what you feel. Unfortunately, that's a big thing with cardiovascular disease, and why it's so um, scary is that you don't know what your plaque buildup is like. It is a
Yeah.
silent disease. So, unfortunately, when you are really emphasizing a diet that is known to be associated with cardiovascular disease risk, I'm really scared of the potential harm of that. So, it's important to try to weigh out these immediate, I feel good or I'm losing weight, with what does the science show about the long term risks of this dietary pattern.
Mm, thank you for that. I want to talk to you about some of the non-alcoholic drinks that you have been testing. And I have been watching you and absolutely loved you opening these cans and little bottles of non-alcoholic drinks and mocktails. Why do you do that? Like, I love the idea and I love watching you. And I think, oh, I'm always after another sort of booze-free tipple. Um,
Mhm.
Talk to me more about that passion of yours there. It's so great.
Yeah. So as I've shared some more information about alcohol and the association with cancer risk, another statistic here is that a report showed that only 1 in 3 Americans are aware that there's a link between alcohol and cancer risk, which is really unfortunate that many people aren't even aware. But we're actually seeing here in the US a trend in the booze-free, non-alcoholic movement where people are limiting alcohol, avoiding alcohol. We're seeing a whole rise of companies out there that are making mocktails, so things that taste like traditional cocktails but don't have alcohol. They're using distilled spirits that don't have alcohol, so you can get that
Yeah.
taste of tequila or gin or whiskey without the alcohol. So same thing with craft beers are out there as well. There's wines that are de-alkalized, so they've removed most of the alcohol. There also are some products that just kind of blending different teas and juices to try to get the similar taste of wine without ever having alcohol present in that
Mm.
product. So I think it's really exciting that although we have a lot of work to do on people being aware of alcohol and cancer risk, there are at least a lot of people aware of alcohol and how it might make them feel. It impacts sleep quality, increases the risk of cardiovascular disease, increases the risk of dementia. Um, Unfortunately, yeah, there's no benefits for alcohol intake
Yeah.
health-wise.
All of those lovely products, the wines and this booze-free spirits and everything you've just mentioned, do they all sit on the ultra-processed food aisle, though, Krystle? Because a lot of the ones I
Mm.
see, they're like full of crap, basically.
Oh yeah, that is such an important point because yes, there are some that are just like a soda, honestly. Like they have so much added sugar in them that they definitely lean on the side of sodas. Some of the booze-free like spirits have actually been, I've been surprised at their nutritional profile, that very low calorie, not using added sugar. Um, I'm not sure how they make these things really
Yeah.
to be, because I've seen some different products out there. Like they are just kind of distilling with some herbs and botanicals to get the flavor into this um, product so that it can taste like gin
Mm.
or whiskey, for example. But yes, that is super important to look at. And I think that's also a benefit because here in the US, and I think it's the same in Europe as well, that beer, liquor does not have to list the calories in them. They are regulated here in the US. Alcohol is not regulated by our Food and Drug Administration, our FDA, so they don't have to have that food label on them.
Ah,
So people don't
okay.
know.
So
Mm-hmm.
I have been looking at beers, for example, like the non-alcoholic beers, and there are some non-alcoholic beers that are really high in sugar, actually. And the Beck's Blue one, which I really quite like, has no added sugar. And that's quite amazing when you look at two bottles and they might taste very similar. That one is really high in the added sugar and the other one has none. And so I do think it's important to look at the back. We've just spoken before we started to record. There is an app, me and my colleague Phoebe at Menopause and Cancer, we use, and it's the UCA app. So YUKA, and you scan things. So you can scan the barcodes, and many foods are listed. And yeah, it's quite interesting when you think, oh, what's in this food? It gives you like a green, orange, or red tick. And I've become a little bit obsessed. But actually, what's been really helpful when I scanned my soya milks, for example, well, some are so much better and others aren't, but the packet and the label and everything looks the same. So we need to look, don't we? When we make any swaps, we need to look. I think that's the thing.
Oh, yeah, 100%. And that's great that you have that access to that information. And, to kind of piggyback on what I was saying, that alcohol does not have to list those calories, but the non-alcoholic products do, because then now they're not
Yeah.
under the alcohol. So you can more clearly see that added sugar in the product, the calories in the product. And it's important to take a closer look at that. And we know that marketing loves to make people think that they are buying a healthier product. They'll
Mm.
be like 10 grams of protein or high fiber. Yeah, but what about the added sugar in the product? What else is in the product? They're going to put front and center what they know consumers want, but you've got to be that detective and look beyond just that front of package and really read into the details of that information, because it's still, yes, it's important to be looking at the added sugar in these products. And that's really a problem with some of these mocktails that I've seen out there. Is
Mm.
just ends
Yeah.
up being like a
Yeah.
soda, which we're recommending limit sugar sweetened beverages. So that still
Yeah.
counts.
Yeah. Where can we find these recommendations? Because we've done a great job at sharing them today. Like at least we have 100% of everyone that's listened to our conversation today, that they know these recommendations exist. Can we share them so that they can share them with their medical team? Is there one link you can share with us?
Sure. So the World Cancer Research Fund would be kind of a one-stop shop there. So it's
Great.
wcrf.org. They have all, you can download if you feel like some light reading, you can download these reports that are, hundreds of pages long, the report, but you can look by cancer type, you can look by specific food. They'll cite the research, they'll show summaries, as well as, again, you can download the reports and really get into some of the more specifics. And I really like that for those that want to read into a little bit more. The American Institute for Cancer Research, so that would be AICR.org, has more like summary kind of things, infographics, recipes. They even have like a free online a program that can help you with adhering to these cancer prevention recommendations. So that would be another resource as well. But that's great to think about. There's so much information online. Where do I go? There's conflicting information. I say, go to the evidence, go to the original source of this information where they're bringing together experts, they're looking at the science critically and summarizing all of that to put together these guidelines.
Thank you so much. And where can we find you, Krystle? Because maybe everyone wants to watch you put together your non-alcoholic cocktails and your lovely, brilliant just resources. What's the best way? I'm going to link to your website, but where can we find you on social media maybe?
Yeah, I hang out on Instagram at Cancer
Yeah.
Nutrition HQ. I'm trying to do weekly lives where I share a new mocktail, non-alcoholic beer. I always give my honest opinion on the taste of these
Yeah.
products, but I love to try them and just show people to just get a little more adventurous with that. But I also like just sharing some of the research that's coming out. You
Yeah.
mentioned some of my more recent posts. I like for people to say, like, yes, we got these reports, but there's new research coming out literally every day. So it's important to stay up to date on what's coming out.
Yeah. Thank you so much for everything and for your time today. Have a good day. And I hope to speak to you soon.
Yes, I always love our conversations. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. Right. I hope you found this conversation helpful. It is my real intention with this episode that 100% of us are informed about these guidances, their recommendations, that we can share them with our friends who might have walked a similar path. Not to say this is what you need to do, but to say to people, there are some recommendations, and now make up your own mind. Is there something you can do to improve? Or maybe to share with your doctors, nurses, oncologists, anyone in your healthcare team, because you might need support, like we said at the beginning of the conversation. You might want to work with a dietitian or nutritionist. You might need exercise support. Don't do it alone, and don't think there is no one there that can help you, because with a little bit of a thinking cap on, there might be people who can help you find access. There's great charities, like we mentioned, our database. So do reach out to people in your network to see who can support you. I hope it's been helpful. I hope that we all feel better supported, at least knowing what the recommendations are for all of us navigating life after cancer.